Good afternoon. Please enjoy your lunch. I do want to say up front, when Uhuru starts to read, maybe not eat. That would be better. So just a bit of a logistical instruction, if I may. Good afternoon. I am really delighted to be here, honored actually, to have been invited to guest host this reading of Uhuru Phalafala's work, Mine. I must say that Uhuru is one of the most well-read, well-traveled and devout thinkers I've ever met, and I'm truly honored to be able to mediate this session today. I also want to thank the organizers of this wonderful conference, out there, and also Uhuru for inviting me to do this and to be able to be here. My name is Hanneke Stuit. I'm an associate professor of literary and cultural analysis at the University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I work on South African pastorals and Dutch domestic colonization. And in this context, I first met Uhuru in Amsterdam in November of 2023, the South African Institute in Amsterdam, which I must say is the biggest off-continent library of South African material. So if you want to look things up, go there. It has a really good library. And we've been in conversation ever since. But over to Uhuru now. So Uhuru Phalafala is a writer, researcher, activist, archivist, scholar with research interests in critical race studies, indigenous epistemologies and cosmologies, social movements, and not to forget jazz. She's senior lecturer in literary studies at Stellenbosch University, South Africa, and the author, as we know, of Mine, the cover of which we can see here. And she's edited and introduced, together with Zvavahera the collected poetry of South Africa's second poet laureata, and has also written a monograph on this poet with the title and the Black Arts Movement, Poetics of Possibility. All of this is rather recent work, 2023, 2024. Before this time, Uhuru was also actively working on questions, amongst others, of the matriarchate, of which I hope we will more today. For instance, by republishing and introducing a book of collected poetry by Sono Molefe entitled Malibongwe, Poems from the Struggle by ANC Women. And currently she's working on a book project on Black ecological practices, which is a topic I'm sure we will also touch on today. In terms of, just interrupting myself a little bit, in terms of logistics, I will introduce the book a little bit now, then we will go to Uhuru's reading, which is one stretch, about 20 minutes, 20-25 minutes, and then we will engage in conversation afterwards. So this book, Mine, to me at least, is an epic poem in more ways than one. It starts out from a historical moment, historic as in, well, recent history, but truly historical in terms of paradigm shifts. A historical moment in 2018 when a class action lawsuit against the South African mining industry was won in favor of the mine workers who filed it. Uhuru's book asks immediately from the very first page, what does such a victory really mean when many of the miners are dead? Some of them literally still buried in collapsed mine shafts, when the accumulation of white capital remains the standard, when the colonial dynamics of extraction have already wreaked havoc on black families and sociality in general, especially when it comes to violence against women. On a more personal note, when one's grandfather passes away, when one's grandfather dies from the mining dust in his lungs, how does one begin to sing this loss? How does one begin to express how the death of one person forms a prism on the extractive capitalist violence that structures the world? This book, I say, is how. Lebogang Mashile has said about the volume that Phalafala's work is spiritual surgery, exposing a labyrinth network of ancestral memories at a cellular level. it may perhaps not be possible to gauge the full extent and relevance of this surgery for people who do not share a similar lineage or history of structural dispossession. I am sure there are many things about Uhuru's work, for instance, that are impossible for me to understand from my own positionality as a white Dutch woman. My first engagement with Uhuru's work was, I must admit, initially of a most academic and rational nature. But this is a book, I assure you, that you keep reading and that stays close to you and that you grow also closer to. It's really, for me, it's been really growing towards, increasingly growing towards. So that, and even the academic alone is already very rewarding, but I really want to invite you to open yourself up to the work for further engagement. Because we can, I believe, feel resonances of other people's lives in our own fibers, perhaps through our own family histories, and the strangely candid light of mourning and grief that can cast onto the present. And this is where we can share. If I have now created the impression that this work is about litany alone, please make no mistake. There is joy, there is resistance, there is liberation in Uhuru's work. A liberation that remembers and seeks to unearth, but that is never a going back. This, I find, one of the most impressive aspects of Uhuru's work, that it never gets stuck. No matter how deeply underground she takes us, historically or emotionally, there is always movement, resistance, and love. Nothing is ever stagnant in mind, as asphyxiating as the conditions it describes may be. But please, without further ado, let's turn to Uhuru herself. So please, you can put away your sandwiches, that would be great. Let's get started. Please, Uhuru, may I ask you to come to the microphone.
Greetings. First, a word of gratitude to those who invited me here, the organizers, Ellen and Gigi. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here and to share with you this wonderful tome, Mine, Mine, Mine. Thank you to you, Hanneke, for your generous introduction. I really, really appreciate it. Mine, Mine, Mine chronicles the life of my grandfather, who worked as a gold miner in Johannesburg. We are from the north of the country, in Limpopo, so he was what we call a migrant laborer, which meant that he left his family, his children, one of which is my mother. He left for 11 months and 3 weeks of the year to go work in the mines, and came back to see them for a week over Christmas. This is his story. This is the story of our fathers, our brothers, our nephews, our grandfathers, but it is also the story of our mothers who were married to these men, our grandmothers, the grandchildren, myself. It is the story of my grandfather, but it is the story of our collective grandfathers in South Africa, in Southern Africa, in Global South, and everywhere where mining has impacted the lives of people. This collection is written in 6 movements. I'm going to be reading from movement 1, movement 2, movement 3, movement 4, and movement 6. You will hear me speaking about Rahulu. Rahulu is grandfather in my language. We begin with an epigraph. In 2018, a historic silicosis class action lawsuit against the mining industry in South Africa was settled in favor of the miners. Footnote: the miners are dead. Bringing legality into matters of state versus property reproduces colonial violence. How about land? What about white capital? What about black overlords? Some are still buried under mine shafts. An unpayable debt, no favor. An incalculable catastrophe explored in 6 movements. Movement 1, Lekarapa. My grandfather is dead. He was vomiting blood, my mother says. Lungs contaminated by history, brimming full with my dust. He left, went. He was always away, always leaving. A migrant laborer, missed his first child's birth, his second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. When I last saw him, he asked my mother, "Who is this fine young man?" My mother corrected him tenderly, "She is your granddaughter, Papa." He must have been washed with shame, triggered, haunted till his last days by the recurrence of that question. Each time he came home once a year for Christmas, presented with a newborn, an infant, a toddler. And who is this fine little baby? She is your daughter. He is your son. Rahulu, did you have to kick your heart shut when you met your stranger children? These young babes with open mouths and fledgling hearts? Did you search their faces, looking for your eyes? Did they feel a gulf in your heart, broad with longing and love? Or did you feel like a stranger father to them? Distance and time informing your self-preservation? Did your heart harden like scab on a wound? How did you preserve the memories of these people, this stranger family of yours, when you were baking in earth's womb, feverish with yearning, miscarrying all dreams of kin and family? At what point, with no photograph, no letter, no visitation, did your heart your manhood collapse into itself and give up on dreams of fatherhood, of community, husband, uncle, brother, grandfather, as the months and years unraveled, sludging forth with cruel hope? At what point did you down tools of digging and drilling and mining futures where you were reunited permanently with your blood? Was it after the 6th union strike when mine slopes collapsed and buried your brothers alive? Some under 20 years old, young bulls in their prime, locked in the pits of gold. Was it then that you saw death unmarked, unrecorded, unceremonious, that you clearly understood your insignificance? When your demands for a pay raise or better living conditions or rights to have your wives visit the city were laughable and met with scorn? Was it the message from the Chamber of Mines that made it blood-curdling clear? Any miner who goes on strike shall be permanently banished to their homeland and their hard taxes quadrupled. Failure to pay will be punishable by death. Social death, communal death, familial death, ambiguous loss. Rahul, did you dread coming home to searching eyes and hearts, to strangers who were once kin, to impotent excitement and dreary celebrations? Were your lungs already half filled? Could you breathe? Where is the life I have come to live? I live in deadly conditions of protracted absences. I am unavailable, a void in my family, ringing with loss, longing, loneliness and shame. I am battered by the whip of history. There is no sanctuary. My mind is a terrifying adversary. There my family resides, fatherless. There my livestock roams without a herder. There the rains fail to nourish the drought in my soul. I am parched, dried out, moisture leaking from my face. I am a critical mess, broken and unmendable. I am a ghost of a father, a son, an apparition, living in the pipe dreams of my oppressors. I scare my own children.
They wail when they see me. My neighbors offer half-hearted smiles when stranger King December visitor comes. Crack their jaded jaws, making conversation. My wife mirrors my shame. She closes her heart against my name. I am the inglorious dead. I do not want or need or desire. My mother, her companion, preaches life. Leave a part of you here for us to live. She promises death. She wants life. My wife obliges. Her warmth nauseates me. Her softness fills me with dread. I want to beat her skin till it ruptures my impenetrable heart. Drain the grief and sorrow in my soul, my shame, my name, my pain. Leaking her forgotten dreams, overripe and putrefying. We swelter through pause, steaming abreast, huffing, I cannot breathe, puffing mine dust, feeling her pulsating under death, not breathing, hollowed by duty, mocked by marital blasphemy, hiding hurt and heart, numbing memories of pleasures coveted and stolen elsewhere. Movement 2, Molitelo. A vicious modernity disfigures black maternity, turns black women's wombs into factories producing blackness. Wombs of profit and prophets, birth canals strengthening GDP, ushering children into non-status, non-being. Black women's birth canals, domestic middle passages, forced to deliver sons into the mine tomb of the state, a dehumanizing project that traps mothers into obligatory reproduction to honor patriarchs, to honor capitalist duties, widows with living husbands, birthing sorrow and longing, youthful hearts gorged by grief under patriarchal oath and code of silence. We do not speak of our heartbreak, the depression, the inability to breathe, the lustful nights, the desire for flight, the foundering dreams of the city of lights, the unspoken rights to partake in the gold. We shall forget the newborn, the ones we buried and never talk about. The tongues we had to swallow in our mourning, trailed with blood stains of memory, we shall master silence and forgetting, grieving but not crying. Rotating between pregnant and breastfeeding, grieving a miscarriage and pregnant, breastfeeding after a miscarriage, grieving a stillbirth while pregnant, bleeding a miscarriage while breastfeeding, pregnant, grieving and miscarrying, grieving infertility after stillbirth, breeding, feeding, bleeding, breastfeeding a stillborn while grieving a miscarriage, grieving postnatal breeding. Ke motswetši, ke imile ke a tlhoboga, ke motswetši. Ke motswadi wa go tlhoka setswetsi, motswetsi wa go tlhoka lesea. Ke motswadi wa go tlhoka setswetsi, motswetsi wa go tlhoka lesea. Not waving, but drowning. Grieving, birthing boys that become prophet. Hating love that grieves the heart. Closing heart against willful abduction. Grieving husbands who become profitable boys. Grieving stillbirth in the stillness of longing. Lasting grief in the breastfeeding of profitable boys. Miscarrying orgies of postnatal gross domestic loss. Do not cry, do not cry. Why are you crying? Why are you crying? Musalla. Grieving but not crying. In 1961, my grandmother went to the City of Lights with her husband. Lodging hidden in the crevices of the cold compounds, the matriarchs orchestrated the visit. She wasn't ovulating when he was home. A mule with a practical agenda, 2 weeks tops. But the iciness of the city bonded their flesh longer. In the middle of the night, a raid. Hide behind the curtain of history, under the blanket of white terror. Hey boy, what's this stuff bitch doing here? She doesn't have a permit. Sorry, my boss. Hey bitch, this is not bloody Kazankulu. Don't look at me when I'm talking to you. Boy, does your wife know you play with whores in this shop of yours? Please, sir, please. She is my wife. Our child just died and we are grieving. Listen to this stuffer acting white. My child just died. I want her gone before the sun comes out. And they were gone. Leaving a flame of shame, licking clean all affection, bringing the weight of history to crush their disposable lives. Do not cry. Why are you crying? We don't talk about these things. Don't cry. Let's not talk about these things. There's a train. There's a train There's a train, there's a train, there's a train, there's a train. Movement 3. Mahona. Police pester pedestrians for passes. Dompas, my life, my wife. Hungry hand comes back with nothing from the rear pocket. Where is your pass, boy? Now I ride in the Kwela, heavy air, massive, with song and solidarity, moments of clamoring clarity. Amandla! Away to my woo, yeah, Africa. In jail, we eat political education, wash it down with revolution amid rats, cockroaches, and ticks. In the mines, we get shorn like black sheep. The prisons shave us like disease-infested infidels. Our lungs are filled with silicosis in the mines. We are asphyxiated in the prisons, lungs riddled with tuberculosis. We cannot breathe, drowning in the blood of tortured comrades who fell from the 9th floor by slipping on a piece of soap while washing, or by hanging on the 9th floor while slipping. White lies infiltrating radioactive waves of international press. The natives are restless, says one headline, while prisoners' heads are in the firing line. My grandfather towing the line of secretly throwing black fists in the air while playing docile, drilling the gold standard of white monopoly. America, America. Arbiter of morality, enemy of dirty communists, assisting apartheid apprehend and assassinate black anti-racist activists through severe surveillance and perverse alliances to subdue revolution. Jim Crow and apartheid sitting in the tree. K-I-L-L-I-N-G. Thatcher and apartheid sitting in a tree. K-I-S-S-I-N-G. French kissing federal intelligence, building iron curtains with our gold, intercepting and infiltrating insurrections, chasing imagined red peril and roige farce. We will protect our right to pillage Africa for natural resources by any means necessary. Trample them with the might of our first world. We are America. These kafirs and niggers don't know the real cost of the civilization they enjoy. We will crush any savage and barbarian who wants to stop progress. You can count on us, Verwoerd. We locked away the terrorist Sobukwe. We provided intel for Lily's farm raid, where those bloody savages and nigger lovers thought they could bring the Algerian revolution to South Africa. They will rot in jail. Yes, sir. They will rot in jail. Yeah. Abelungu, ne? Abelungu, goddamn. Abelungu, goddamn. Abelungu, goddamn. Abelungu, goddamn. Abelungu, goddamn. Abelungu, God damn! Abelungu, God damn! Abelungu, God damn! Abelungu, God damn! Abelungu, God, Mississippi, God damn!
Movement 4. Black Rage in Swallow. Mam Dorcas, Queen Pin of the Reef, owner of herself and many a man, curtailing many a legislation, skirting fictions of the state, shifting means of production to her backyard, and turning shack into palace of dreams where revolutions are made. A veritable compound of stars where hip identities are lived. Ma'auti in Brentwood and Dopsy, relishing drops of mellowhood. Chalimingas serenading the day, Kipimwekezi flowering nightfall. Comrade poets reading banned literature or smuggling records, paintings and letters through Ausdocker's Swaziland Connects. Tsotsis brandishing knife skills of Master Kears, putting holes in miners' weekly pay, gashing flesh with a gambling impulse. Bare zone of unbridled beauty, loud and intentional about their blackness, adorn the latest fashion, embellished in red Q-tex and leather figure belts, don black power berets, a cacophony of cackles and reckless abandon, young lions crouching against feral surveillance. Sheila's day, an assertion of full humanity that turns body of labor into body of leisure, claiming urban identities in night classes, hiding political training behind sewing and knitting, fashioning soft power behind the eye of the hurricane. Yes, revolutionary needlework. Aus Matsidiso, called Mary by her madam, who loves dogs and tolerates Africans. Her home an embattled zone of domestic surveillance, dutiful discipline, a daily routine, social warfare on black female body, hateful mind bosses give white wives rights to prowl auction blocks and hire house slaves, whom they rename Matsidiso, now girl, T-girl, maid girl. Faithful white women embrace white power and white wealth, wear sleeves of gold and cloak white terror, kleptocracy, cocky pride, enjoying spoils of their men's exploits. Their husbands only see black women during enactments of male power, defile us in front of their wives, in the refuge of their castles, cut our face with bones of their scorned ribcage, suckle their spawn, Adam, on the bleak bounty of our body, wetness against the aesthetic of their breast, to be pecker and firmer in richness and in health, for husband's tenderness after he has drained his violence in us. A lapse in judgment of momentary fall from grace, tempted by the devil with an insatiable appetite. White women call us whores. Black men call us whores. See us as sites of conquest that mock their shame. Smack us in the face for getting hit by racing horse carts of the masters, virile machine weaponized. We, the receipts of deceit in the seventh quarter where Adam you suckled, comes of age in threadbare linens, a rites of bus passage, historical master copy of the father's original sin, braiding the raiding of my grandmother's body with the fibroid of my daughter. Comrade Kwezi, sobered by the precarity of blackness, of living in the violence of a waiting room, joined the ranks of forces, jumped barbed wire fences into the heart of darkness, searching for light of liberation through comrade crocodile jaws, craving her tender flesh,
fresh with raw desire. Recalling survival tips, she stabbed him in one eye, but being in a movement where one-eyed comrades are hailed as heroes, in parades of strength and in uniformed ceremonies of primordial social hierarchies, predatory sizing of the wilderness, blood of life and death embroiling on the threshing floor of battlefield, biting and gasping, trusted Kader, heating his shrill weapon in the natural oven of the savannah, fighting for man's freedom and nationalization of the mine, ownership paradigm exported from the auction block to unequal power relations of court rulings, using laws our rapists wrote to put our rapists on trial. Amandla, away to my daughter. Movement 6, Lefalantate. Lefalantate, ki mahloko le maswabi, le boitsholo ba go fenywa, ba go tlhabisa ditlhong, ba go tlhoka mantswe, ba go omisa leleme, ba mo tsietse botho a sa phela, ba mo tsiela polelo a sa na le molomo, ba mo tsiela lentswe a sa na le leleme. Motho ke sera seo fela se rego ge se rakaletswe, se se na leleme, se latlhe botho, se tlhabane ka marumo. Our inheritance is deep disgrace, shame, silence, and defeat that dries our mouths and leaves deserts in our souls. My grandfather's humanity was taken while he was alive, his language broken in his mouth, his tongue severed and buried. A human being is a beast that when cornered and its tongue taken, throws away its humanity and fights ferociously with weapons. I hit a fit of hell and home my house of hunger, hollowed by heinous history. Unhinged I hunt your hurt and hurt your heart, turn the hate on hanging my hollow home in cold blood. The horror, oh the horror. I hit my heart, habitually hurt my hate of hardship. It's hard, I hate my hurt. I hurt, it hurts. It's hard, it hurts. I hit a fit of hell and home my house of hunger, hollowed by heinous history. Unhinged I hunt your hurt and hurt your heart and turn the hate on hanging my hollow home in cold blood. The horror, oh the horror. I hit my heart, habitually hurt my hate of hardship. It's hard, it's hard. I hate my hurt. I hurt, it hurts. It's hard, it hurts. But did we die? Yes, we did die. Found salvation from whoredom and lascivious eyes of the master, salivating over harems on plantations and servants' quarters. Black bodies on strike, self-immolate for transcendence. out of the ruins and smolder of remarkable destruction, in the thick silence of starry darkness, the blackness of creation, a vision and a voice. Do not be afraid. You have found favor and redemption. Unto you, daughters, shall be born with medicine for the lineage in the bones of their tongues. Yes, we did die. In the blackness of destruction and creation, we part our hips like the sea and birth ourselves. Use our mothers' names to sing our resurrection. Weave our purpose with gifts from 3 wise women who imprinted scriptures forged out of stardust and spectacular smithereens of our former selves into kilts of our hearts. Moonlight illuminates our new name. The dying wish of burning mouths blazing in our bones, blossoming with revelations of our spirit supreme.
Maybe some breathing, pun not intended, but literally, right? You can actually stand. You feel free to stand.
That in your bodies, I need it.
I'm also giving Uhuru a chance to recollect before we move into the conversation part of today's session. I think your response says more than I could say. So I will just continue and very loosely outline the topics that we have prepared for you in relation to this poetry, this beautiful book. I have a few questions prepared for you, Uhuru, once you're ready. And these questions are mostly, like I said, loosely structured around topics for starters, perhaps a bit of a material historical setting, situating the work, also how Uhuru got to this point of writing this book. I would like to address both the materiality but also the theme of breathing as we proceed. there is the question of multi-perspectival writing, of writing together with ancestry and writing multifocally, that I think is really important to address here. Also questions of land, as was also touched on in several of the panels, at least the ones that I have attended, and also in the wonderful keynote that preceded this session. Obviously this question of land is central. We will be talking hopefully also about the role of the sonic in your work today. There's many intertextual references for us to touch upon, and perhaps finally we can also talk about what has been called not only on the blurb of this wonderful book, but more generally, I would say in a context of like anti-pastoral writing, a geopoetics of the ground, or even in this case, the underground, and what are the differences that we then see and travel across traditions in that respect. So these are some of the topics we could address. We've brought also some snippets of the poetry that we can read in a bit more detail as we proceed. I guess a little bit of a temperature check. Uhuru, how are you? How are you finding yourself today?
I am here.
That's all I wanted to hear.
I am back in the body. I am present. I am well. Yes.
How are you? How are you? Yes, good. All right, perfect. Thanks so much for this, Uhuru. Maybe a place to begin could be this question of the emergence of the book. Or shall we talk about the historical setting first? Historical, maybe a bit more distance first? Sure. Yeah?
Yes.
So I brought this slide from page 61. As Uhuru already explained prior to the reading, the book has roughly two parts. First is the biggest one. It consists of 6 epic movements that vary in different perspectives, that give us different sort of glimpses in these legacies of the mining industry in South Africa through this prism of one person, one who was never one person, but also one family. At the end of these 6 movements, there is a coda, which contains shorter poems, and which sort of bring strategies and suggestions for working with these legacies, I would say. And then in the second part, we move towards deeds, acts in the book. Right, so that is roughly the structure. But I brought from these later parts of the book this very brief poem. Who has asked me to read the stuff that I've selected myself, and I will try to do that to the best of my ability. It's one from page 61 if you want to know who can see your leafing through the book. So this is part 2. From part 2, State of Mind, Deeds, which is of course a deed is an action, but also a legal transfer. Being there at the opening of this poem, minds are the key site to study the unholy trinity and afterlives of Dutch slavery, British colonialism, and apartheid in South Africa. Not wanting to assume familiarity with this context, although all of us are specialists in one way or another, obviously, in this room. Can you maybe talk us through your decision to open the second part of the book with this statement?
Yeah, sure. Greetings again, and thank you for being here in this last segment of the program. I appreciate it. And I just also wanted to say I ordered 50 books to arrive for the conference so that you could possibly buy for yourself. But alas, customs drama, they just did not arrive on time. So I started hopeful, like, where are they? But hopefully you can just order. It's available everywhere when you buy books. Yeah, so it's important to note that I'm an academic, and I wrote Mine during my sabbatical when I was writing my monograph. And my monograph has to do with critical race and the relationship between Black South Africans and African Americans during Cold War, during the apartheid era. And one of the poets who I was looking at was talking about mining. And in my monograph, I was wanting to write about racial capitalism. But I'm a literary scholar. At the time, I had no idea where to start. I attended lectures that told me that racial capitalism is a political economy. That intimidated me. I was like, whoa, like both? Okay, let's understand that a little bit more. I read Black Marxism by Cedric Robinson, and learned more about racial capitalism. But it was still not landing. And it was around that time that I got in touch with my grandfather's story and learned about racial capitalism as it inheres my lineage, as it sits in my family history, as it sits in my maternal family side, as it sits in my own body as inheritor of that history, as the grandchild of my grandfather. So I learned about racial capitalism in an embodied manner, and then moved from there to start thinking about how I don't know this history. So I think that this poem I was writing for myself, to just be like, do you get it now? That mining is the foundation of racial capitalism in South Africa, in Southern Africa. Mining puts Southern Africa, the South, within secretaries of global capitalism. Mining is part of a plantation economy, as I have come to theorize in my other work. I wanted to then bring mining within the same conversations as the plantation economy, slavery in the Cape, slavery in the larger Western world. I wanted to create a kind of plantation continuum by looking at mining in the Cape and how it very clearly you can map it from the abolition of slavery, how laws were put into place that ensured the imprisonment of the newly freed slave labor into the prisons that then moved them to the mines. So there's a clear kind of plantation continuum, carceral continuum that moves this labor from slavery into mining in Kimberley with the founding of the diamonds, let me say, rediscovery of the diamonds, and then the rediscovery of the gold. So I wanted to trace that for myself because this is not popular knowledge. At least when I was looking for it, I could not find it. To think about how Dutch slavery and British colonialism are in this kind of unholy conjugation that produces apartheid, and all of it is centered on land and extraction of the land, but also extraction of labor. And the book is very much concerned about extraction of labor, not only labor as toil, but extraction of reproductive labor, so wombs as manufacturing sites for more labor of the boys or the slaves. So this kind of begins to map that territory. I'm not sure why it's blinking like that, but I had not realized how much kind of Christian imagery and themes are in the book, it's always going to be present because, of course, both of these nations come under the auspices of Christianity and Christian enlightenment. So I wanted to offer a critique to that and how that also is an unholy alliance that produces a global capitalist center in the South that basically creates so much havoc and social death and all forms of death, which we are still living today.
Thanks, Uhuru. That's crystal, as I'm used to from you by now. That is crystal clear, as is the poetry. Yeah. As I think it's already clear from the way you answer this question, and this is something that I find it so special about your work, is that you combine different, I would say, registers in the work. I think also very audible in the reading, where you spoke your grandfather's voice. I also heard your grandmother, your mother's voice in there, right? But then there is also this very clear analytical line, which becomes, I think, increasingly strong also as the book progresses, which is not to say that the personal ever falls out of the more academic analysis, right? Well, that was the impression that I had on it. But I was hoping you could maybe tell us a bit more about your decision, or maybe struggles too, I can imagine, in combining those registers and still coming to compelling and convincing poetic form.
I think it's all of the traditions that shape who I am. I'm a literary scholar and I'm a writer, but it has taken me years to claim those labels, especially the writer one, because I listen to writers and they're all saying, you wouldn't catch me as a child without a book in my hand and so forth. And I didn't read as a child. I was not reading as a child. I, in fact, started reading in my adult life. I grew up under apartheid. We had very limited access to such. The government put together a legislation called Bantu education that was intent on offering a low quality education to black people of South Africa so that they can end up in servitude. So I didn't have that, so I always had a kind of a complex around not having read. But I do come from a strong oral tradition culture, where the women in my family are custodians of a great lineage of storytelling and of passing on stories and philosophies. I argue in my other work that these are philosophies of the people and knowledge systems that were passed around the kitchen table daily, on walks and so forth. And they spoke with so much fervor and with so much theatrics that I was always inspired, and I think some of it still lives in me. And so I come from that oral tradition that was deeply shaped by the women in my family, and later hip-hop shapes my thinking, and hip-hop helps me to think about how I can continue to use that oral inheritance in ways that are overtly political. And then I go to university to study literature, and I get introduced to the epic as form, and it was Chaucer, it was Ulysses, it was Wasteland. I do not understand it, right? And I was just lost. I was like, what is going on here? And I was told, these are epics, these are great intertextual, multi-referential texts, and you just don't get it. And I'm like, I don't. I feel like an idiot, And then in the South African literary history as well, the epics are quite male. The man wanders and wanders with an A and wanders with an O, and that produces these raw kind of tones. And this is my experience of the epic. But I wanted to write an epic that represents the female form. I wanted to write an epic that is quite gendered in specific ways. I wanted to write an epic of the women, an epic that sounds the voices that I had around the kitchen table, the epic that sounds the voices that sang at family gatherings, at weddings, at funerals, at rites of passages and ceremonies. I wanted to write an epic that moves and bends and has muscle and is alive, and that could only be or come to be if I sublimated the way I've been trained of what the epic is, but also what a writer is, right? This singular genius who goes in some attic and goes to write. I don't know where they write in the attic, but I wanted to write with community. I wanted to write in community. I wanted to write in a collaborative voice and in a co-creational format that speaks with a collective voice, that speaks with an ancestral voice, that speaks with an intergenerational voice, that speaks with the voice of the land, if one can imagine what that would be, that speaks with the voice of other living beings around and that shape and inform who I am. So yeah, the kind of multi and polyvocal nature of the epic comes from that, the overturn of the male tradition of the epic, but also of this kind of writer as I don't know, the preoccupation of a writer who leaves community to go sit somewhere in isolation to produce. I wanted to overturn that and rather return to community and speak with them.
Maybe in direct response to that, we can go two ways. We will eventually go two ways. The sonic is obviously very important, but first, I think I would like to return to multi-voiceness, multi-vocality, maybe in conjunction with the idea of breathing. And my reason for putting them together is because I noticed, let's see where we are, well, because I noticed in your reading as well, and if you engage with this book in your own time further, there is a repetition that comes from the second movement, where you talk about grief and crying from a matrilineal perspective, and the way in which I hope I read this right, but the way in which women maybe sometimes also tell each other not to cry or not to make too much noise about what is really a structural, overwhelming sense of loss and dispossession in the personal sense, but also in terms of futurity, I take it. Like where does one take it from there? Right, so I've just distilled from page 15, which is the end of the second movement, the way you double the idea of breath with this idea of silence, or not being able to say something, or asked not to cry. And I will mispronounce, but right, the ending says, Oskala, don't cry, and that I cannot breathe. Right, so there's this way in which you put these two together, talking about several voices, and also your, as you just mentioned, your engagement also with US histories of Black dispossession. To what extent, I assume you see maybe a communality there, but is there also, besides this complex entanglement of crying, which asks for expression, right? So if you say to someone, don't cry, there is already sound, there is noise, right? So this is sort of where I'm also interested in how the expression is inevitable, and to what extent that maybe also relates to the inevitability of breathing. Like we have to breathe, sometimes we cannot breathe quite literally, right? But what we must in order to go on. Right, so do you see this as a commonality? Do you see this as a juxtaposition? I'm sorry if I'm getting lost in my question a little bit. There's many questions in there. I can also tear them apart if that's better. If I rephrase, like, why did you put these two lines together? about crying and breathing, if it was a conscious decision?
Breath, and I think my mind also is very interested, just extending the meditation from the previous answer, in locating systems of oppression in the body. I think that theory has, been beautifully done, and there's amazing theory that tells us of the foundation of colonialism and slavery and so forth. But I wanted to do something else here and locate these multiple structures of oppression in the body and how they sit in the body and how they settle in the body. And there are multiple ways to answer that. In Chinese healing, which is part of my own healing practice, grief sits in the lungs. So they locate emotions in the body, and grief is something that sits in the lungs. And I found that very generative and very productive, because I myself sometimes catch myself not breathing. In fact, it's the opening line of my next poetry book, Duke for it. But I sometimes catch myself not breathing, because you had to hold your breath so much living in white supremacist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal society. If you live in a white settler society like South Africa, and in my mind, South Africa and the US have very similar geographies in the sense that they are white settler societies, and very few, and I can think of very few nations that have had slavery that mutated into colonialism, full-on settler colonialism, and then into Jim Crow apartheid. So this trifecta of continuous subjection, continuous oppression, and continuous theft of kin, theft of breath, theft of labor, theft of intelligence and being. And when I think about breath, of course, I locate the loss of breath with the asphyxiating nature of living in white settler societies, where you continuously have to be on the lookout. Fanon has written at length about living with such a tick in your body. And of course, the inability to breathe then becomes such a resonant rallying cry, transoceanic in the US, and with George Floyd being strangled by the police on camera, and I'm always attuned to that, because, as I said, my work is preoccupied with these two worlds, the experience of the Black South African and the African American, as being very parallel. Part of what this book wants to do, which is what I do in my theoretical work as well, is to think about and think with Black Studies. The Black Studies has produced some of the most exciting work that continuously activates me and is life-giving, in this wake of death. When I read Christina Sharp's In the Wake, I was deeply moved, and she identifies 3 holes in her book, 3 holes that are like enclosures that continue to shape Black people's life: the hold of the ship, of the transatlantic slave trade, the hold of the plantation, and the hold of the prisons, mass incarceration. So these 3 holes that have been enclosures for Blackness since 1492 and continue to structure and inscribe Black life. She kind of surfaces in her book. And to those 3 holes, I wanted to add the mine. I was like, okay, the mine is another hold. It is a literal hold. It is in the belly of the earth. It is a grave. It is hell. I was like, oh, you're in hell. You are in a grave your inner health, right? So I wanted to also add mining to this meditation on the hold that keeps taking the breath. So this is a deeper meditation on the asphyxiating nature of what's colonialism. I hope I answered, because I know there was brief and then...
No, this is better than the question. So thanks very much for that. I think I just put like one of the poems that you offer in the book, just to keep layering the conversation in this way, right? So as you just mentioned, Christina Schaaf's work in a way, sort of thinking about the ship, the plantation, and the prison, and then adding the mine. Personally, for someone who studies South African literature, this was quite or relatively new, because few mining discourses make it to the mainstream, and it's a mainstream that tends to be dominated either by city life, or it's closely connected to what Erica was talking about as well. It either represents city life, or it represents countryside life in its most romanticized form, right? So I think besides just maybe pointing out or trying to contextualize in that sense, I think the book does such enormous critical work already by shifting gear from these mainstream lenses of the countryside and the city to the mine as almost an overlooked. Everybody knows that this is what floats South African economy, but it keeps being overlooked as a site of cultural production, as a space to inhabit, but also as a space, obviously, that imprisons. So I just wanted to turn to page 65 in relation also to this theme of breathing. On the one hand, obviously the idea of the physical difficulty of breathing in white supremacist atmospheres, as Sharp would call that, I suppose. I was really struck by this poem because it also gives, I guess, that necessity, resilience, and potential of breath. Do you want to read it?
No. The poems.
This is the most awkward bit of the So I will try and read this. Evacuating minds that produce the black condition is unlearning asphyxiation, learning how to breathe, refusing death in life, minute by minute. A matter of unmaking, unpatterning, and rewiring our minds and spirits. A deliberate and intentional, radical, persistent choice to resist the toxicity of our inherited disorder. Choosing the comfort zone is electing to breathe my dust when there is oxygen, to breathe underwater when there is land. It is sensing freedom but opting for captivity. Do you see this as, am I sort of too optimistic in reading this also as a poem of potential? Or is this a strategy of either resistance or resilience when it comes to physical practices too, when thinking about atmospheres and the lodging of grief in the lungs, for instance?
No, you're not being optimistic. I write in the tradition of those who seek possibility in the enclosure, those who seek aliveness in the anti-blackness and the anti-black death that shapes this modernity, with those who refuse the pessimism that can very easily, of course, shape our lives, because we live in a modernity that that is built on anti-Black death and is sustained by anti-Black death. So there is a way in which that can be the defining character of our lives, that our lives are marked by death. But I think with those, and I think it's a Black feminist impulse to think through possibility. My monograph's subtitle is Poetics of Possibility. So I'm very intentional about offering, on the one hand, this critique of this modernity from a decolonial perspective, but I'm also very much invested in shaping a poetic of possibility, a loophole, a breaking out or a breaking into. And so I think this is what the poem is doing. Fanon says colonialism at rest is violent. And I think that if we choose the default, if choosing the comfort, there's no comfort zone if you're not critically engaging with the violence of colonialism as it relates. There's no comfort zone. By choosing the comfort zone, you are choosing to participate in the violence. And for a body like mine, that violence is, I'm on the receiving end of it. So that's not a choice for me. So this other option of being rigorous about choosing life and about livingness and about possibility is a minute by minute. It's a daily struggle and it's a minute by minute, but it is a practice. It's the practice of living, right? Otherwise you're just living and rolling with the punches, but like I said, the punches are on my body, so I'm not rolling with them. So the other choice is to be deliberate about crafting life, right? Having life be a creative force in which I am continuously creating communities in which I feel alive, creating spaces in which I am affirmed, creating and moving through the world, remembering my name, remembering my purpose, and so forth. So this is what the poem is about, and it's very much addressed. The book is not addressed to South Africans, but I'm thinking from that position and seeing how, of course, we now live in a neoliberal, neo-apartheid state, and there's a rising black middle class, and there are those who are really enjoying the comforts of capitalist democracy. And the question is that is there an ethical kind of way of being, of partaking and living and benefiting from that capitalism without it killing you or your immediate kin, not over there in Congo or no, in your family structure, because only one can make it alive, and there's all of that exceptionalism and so forth. So what does it mean to succeed in structures that are made to kill you?
I think, at least poetically, obviously you are offering, I think, us a lot, actually, in terms of strategy. I think if even the line evacuating minds is, I think, also thematically pushed through the book in a very persistent manner, where we can choose to either read this literally as stop mining, and take out those bodies, right? So take them out of the shafts potentially. It can also be like any form of, I guess, of enclosure if we choose to read it more metaphorically, right? And in the coda of your book, I think you offer us several of these strategies. There's a title within this section called Unburied, where I think this idea of evacuation, which obviously, I guess now that I say it out loud, this didn't occur to me in preparation of the session, right? But to evacuate is also, of course, to aid and and to help people escape, right? Or to take away when the disaster is looming. So I think that is also potentially an ecological connection, where evacuation becomes important, not only because of this atmosphere of silicosis or white supremacist atmospheres, but even the extent to which, for instance, in South Africa, people are simply exposed, as is also the case in the US, right? Racial exposure to climate change or pollution. So this idea of evacuation, that is one way to think about it.
Yeah, I like that reading because it speaks to the hold of mining as extending into the current day, and whereas it eats black bodies alive and eats black bodies into its grave and hell, the effects of mining now affect all of us. In Johannesburg, there are all of these mining dumps that, that by now we know they blow uranium and other harmful substances into the air. So that then becomes discriminatory, that we are all breathing this air from the mining. So how do we evacuate? Yeah. How do we evacuate from this climate crisis? Yeah.
So I think besides perhaps the literal rituals that you offer in this section and the metaphorical ones, can I ask about also the sonic aspects of your reading for today? Is this also to some extent like a form of release from things that grow or accumulate in the body as being tied?
Yeah, for sure. I come from the traditional ritual and ceremony in which, and it's indigenous cultures all over, in which we move trauma in the body with the drum and with dance and with moving the body. You metabolize it. You have to move it, otherwise it sits somewhere and metastasizes in your body. And this book is very heavy. I don't have to tell you that. So the sonic materials come in because as I was writing it, I was hearing it, the book itself. So I was hearing these sonic materials. I was collaborating with the sonic, and so I wanted to bring it into the space so that by the time I finish reading that, I'm not just flat and you have to remove me on a stretcher, So move it through the body, metabolize it, and that is it. That comes from indigenous healing practices. You move trauma by dancing and drumming.
Yeah. I mean, it helped me as audience member. It also helped me to have the interpunctions and the resonances of the bell.
Yes.
There to hear the poetry better in a way.
Yeah, I have to share with you that when I read this in Johannesburg, it becomes quite an interesting moment because we are in the vortex of the mining, and I can't even call it afterlives. Mining continues. We are sitting on the actual mine. The undergrounds are hollowed out. So I call it a vortex because it feels like that, and I can see the audience is transfixed, and every line that, every movement, I can see they're implicated. There is no South African who does not have a family member who's been in the mines, or Black South African, and so the sonic material kind of gets them out of they are transfixed, they're gone, and it's to also help us collectively, me and them, to move through, and that's why it's movements. We must move. In your introduction, you were talking about how it's never stuck, right? We can't get stuck. We have to move. We have to move and metabolize and breathe and move things through our bodies and move through these histories and so forth. So the sonic material I can see in the maybe culturally specific context that I can see its work with somebody completely triggered, of course. Maybe something is coming up for them about their own father, own grandfather. It's very personal, and I can see the trauma kind of playing out. And then I have shakers. I have a lot of shakers, but I was going to move through German customs, and there are seeds and there are plant material, so they were going to confiscate them. So shakers are very, very prevalent in the culture, and the shakers really are to move energy through the body, like really. It's an enchanting kind of instrument, and I use that a lot as well.
So is the reason why shakers couldn't go through customs why you chose the train as a dominant theme in the sonics today?
No, the train is the first sight of tragedy. The train is ever present. The train is the sheep. The train is the sheep. And in South Africa, we are affected by both the landed and oceanic slavery and colonialism. So on the one hand, we have our own trans-Indian ocean slave trade and the trade ships that come around the Cape with bodies in bondage. But we also have the train that fetches all of this labor across Southern Africa from Congo south. So the train is the master metaphor of mining. It's the vehicle that moves the stolen labor. It's the vehicle that moves global capitalism.
And it's also the vehicle, right, that connects, let's say, city and countryside, because I think this is something that might be rather specific to some extent to South Africa, is that I think there are many places where mines are rurally located, right? But as you say, Johannesburg is a metropole that emerged out of mining.
Yeah.
You call it City of Lights in your poetry, so-called City of Gold. Right? So it's this strange connection between like you say, the underbelly of the city in the mine, and then the travel back and forth, although not as frequent as one might hope, to rural homelands via this train.
Yeah, rural homelands and Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Mozambique, famously, and so the hinterland of the homeland, but also of what the settler used to call the heart of darkness, like over there. Right? Yeah.
So, if I may, show if we can maybe look at a bit more of your poetry via the screen. To continue talking about sort of these movements, I guess, and strategies. I'm reminded of it because you mentioned movement and not getting stuck, right? And I suppose I have been sincerely thinking, but also often struggling with the term of unburying and what that means and in which context, because you use it a lot in different forms in the collection, and sometimes it means unbury people from a mine shaft. Sometimes it means this legacy is unburied. It should have been maybe buried in a specific way, or these people should have been given proper respect in a specific way that did not occur. But then we also need to evacuate and unbury, to some extent metaphorically, from this idea of mining. Right? So for me it's a very layered, please correct me if this reading does not hit any mark, right? But I think there's this beautiful way. I just wanted also to show you how beautifully, as far as you haven't already noticed yourself, Uhuru connects to ideas also of the oceanic, the slave trade, which just mentioned. Right? We have this in the hold of the ship. In South Africa, there's also the hold of the train. There's this very beautiful lineup of 3 columns, of which I've now chosen 2. They span page 53, 54, and 55. And I'd just like to read a little bit from these to also see the fluidity, I think, and the beauty of how Uhuru mixes these intertextual relations into the specificity of the South African land. And then offers also, I guess, strategies for unburying, reburying. I would like to begin on the right-hand corner. I'm just going to read through, which is a famous quote, I suppose, from, especially to this crowd who may be more familiar with this poem than me, by Derek Walcott, The Sea is History. This gorgeous poem. I will just read the first stanza and then work from there into how Uhuru makes that her own. So the sea is history. Where are your monuments, your battles, martyrs? Where is your tribal memory? Sirs, in that grave vault, the sea has locked them up. The sea is history. And then moving to Uhuru's collection on the left, here lies your monuments, your battle warriors, your venerated mothers, godheads of ancient altars, figurines of your memory. Here lies ceremonial verbs, shattered gourds in clay pots, abandoned in unburied graves. Here the song of your blood. I will continue reading in a moment, but maybe just as a slight pause, what I really appreciated in this gem.
This poem.
Yeah. Good. Well, maybe you want to say something about it. Maybe you should go for it, please.
No, carry on. It hit me differently.
Okay. It's what I really appreciated from this shift is that I think Walcott's poem speaks very readily of, to some extent, an impossibility to recover this history because the sea has swallowed it up. This is a simple reading because the poem continues quite lengthily about describing the position of this history in the seabed and how it engages with different types of fish, etc. But I appreciated the switch that you made here, Uhuru, to simply say, like, it's not, they might not be as visible as one would like or think, right? But it is, I know exactly where that history is. Right? It's here. Here lies your monuments. This is your battle warriors. Here are your venerated mothers. It's right here. These are your godheads of ancient altars. Right? Even if it's shattered gourds and clay pots that are abandoned in graves that perhaps should have been buried but have remained unburied. It's here, and then the switch to the sonic, here the song of your blood. So even if we cannot, as you just said, even if we cannot locate it, there might still be in your body resonances that we can work with in order to work through this grief or metabolize it, as you said earlier. So then I'll skip one page and go to 55, which is something that I've really spoken also with students about this poem, and that are the sacraments of unburying. If you won't mind me reading it.
Maybe practice that you teach this book.
I do. It's not necessarily relevant directly, but
just mention your students.
I do teach this book. I've taught it 3 times. Also because it's, like you say, it's heavy material. I try to choose the groups that I read it with. So I don't teach it continuously, but it's more like for select, I suppose, select students. And we talked about sort of the combination of these poems. And I mean, they tend to need a lot of context, but they can feel the physical part, for sure. So I'm just going to continue to the reading of the sacraments of unburying. Right, thinking about unburying as evacuation or as reburying, depending on how you want to read. So, sacraments of unburying. 1. Light a fire, candles. 2. Offer sacrifice, blood, salt. 3. Sing their names, invocation. 4. Burn sage, smoke, incense. 5. Pour libation, water, embodied. Sorry for the pronunciation. 6. Make offerings, snuff, sweets. Speak to bones, at peace, listen. Unearth bones, makosi. Sing their names, supplicate. Rebury the bones, sing Tina Season. I'm trying to formulate. I don't know why. I'll be honest. I find this very. It hits me always. I don't know why. I often try to formulate. So I'm trying to formulate an open question for you about it. Are you suggesting? Because this is not. I've known you a little bit longer now. This is not a re-ritualization of reality of history, right? It's not like we say, let's say, an unlayered going back to, let's say, tradition in an uncritical way. This is also very clear from the poetry that you have heard today, is that there are ways in which colonial heritage has resonated in black sociality in ways that has created new types of violence. It's never unlayered with how you talk about it. Could you take us through maybe a little bit your thought process in this poem and what you want it to do, or what it did for you?
Yeah, sure. So, just from the very onset, I am deeply inspired and impacted by Caribbean thought and Caribbean poetics. And I saw in my monograph, in the bibliography, that's when it dawned upon me just how much, because I find Caribbean thought deeply energizing and instructive. So, Unburied is a conceptual method that seeks to speak to also Caribbean thought. I don't know if you know the work of Alexis Pauline Gams. She writes about undrowning.
Yeah.
So, which would be what Walcott is doing there. Undrowning. What does undrowning mean? And what does unburying mean? Right? Perhaps undrowning is more mystifying. Because how do you undrown? But I found them to be very generative and productive starting points. Then I read one of my favorite authors, Jasmine Ward. She wrote a book called Sing, Unburied, Sing, and completely gorgeous. And she's also doing something with the ancestral realm. And so just to cite that scholarship and how, if we look at Walcott, where are your monuments, your battles and martyrs? A very popular poem, but it's such a evocative poem that I read the first line as accusatory. Like, so tell us, where are they? Show us. Where is your history? And this is where are your monuments? If we think about the monuments that scatter the landscape in South Africa and across the world of genocidal rapists, quite frankly, the call for roads to be removed, the monument that represent these kinds of histories of conquest, and the canons. There's canons everywhere. Like I visit islands that are littered with colonial cannons, weapons all over the space, and those are the monuments that represent the battles and the martyrs of the West. And that accusation I took very seriously. Where are your monuments? And it's we are not in the culture of monuments. But I also wanted to return to where are your monuments? Roads Must Fall was about where is Black history? Where is Black history? So why is it not taught in schools in our formative years? Why is it not taught in universities? I have had to learn at the feet of elders throughout my 13 years of primary education to my PhD. I did not learn any of the things I'm talking about. I learned things outside of institutions. So where is Black history? That is the question. And it's an ongoing question. I'm not going to be like, oh, we found it. Where is Black history? That's the abiding question. And what happens in these two poems is a kind of meditation on that question. Where are your monuments and so forth? And I'm saying that they are locked up, just like in the sea, they are also locked up in this underground of our mind that we don't learn about in schools, that we don't learn about anywhere. We don't hear about mining. And in fact, mining is such an interesting enterprise because it's underground, it's hidden. You'd have to be really looking for mining and thinking with and through mining you'd have to look hard. You don't chance upon it like a monument. You're not walking on the street and then there's an equestrian kind of peasant towering above you, right? So it is hidden. Black history is hidden. Black history is complex and it's out of sight and requires other ways of seeing, of reading it, of engaging with it. And the way that I have devised of unburying is a conceptual method of engaging with Black history that doesn't have to do with the ocular, with reading it in books, or it's more about listening, deep listening, and attunement of the body, the song of the blood, sacraments, evocation, supplication, invitation, and so forth, right? That is that. So it's a conceptual, unburying amongst many things. It's a conceptual method to engage with Black history.
Thanks so much for that answer. I think this is also like a really, I think, good place to thank you.
Oh.
Because I was just looking at the clock. Sorry for this very brutal.
I was just settling in.
Yes, I saw.
Do you want to engage? Do you want to engage with us?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry for being so hogging of the time. I have to look for permission because it is 2:30.
I mean, I think people who have trains to catch are gonna go when they need to go, and we don't have to be out of the room. We've got to we can be in the room for a bit longer.
Okay. Apologies for the. Please.
10 minutes.
Yeah. Please, questions from the room. Can I see hands so that we know where to go? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's good. Maybe we can go diagonal, like so. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was an incredible reading, really, and I think that your book is, for me, one of those books where literature really knows more than theory. So I think many of the things that you've described have been illuminating what I've been thinking about, or tried to think about. And I really thought that, because you said that you brought in this fourth kind of hold at the mine, adding to Christina Sharp's work, and I think in my reading of your work, you even brought in a superimposed fifth hold, the womb. So my question would be, because there's all this Black feminist criticism and further development of Robinson's racial capitalism as a reproductive racial capitalism, and your book, for me, from what I've heard, was like the perfect literary illustration of all these intricacies of where Robinson's work did perhaps not take into consideration these questions of gender and reproduction. I was just wondering whether you're familiar with this work and whether that's also informed your writing and your literary writing and your theory that you've said that you worked on.
Yes, very quickly. I'm thinking with Saidiya Hartman, Black women's womb, Black women's birth canals as domestic middle passages. That is a Saidiya Hartman theory. So that is the hold of the ship and of the plantation, where what happens to the slave who has non-status. The children are also born into non-status. So it is engaging in Sandra Hartman. But I do love the idea of the weekly with another hold. But I think then it's like the hold that informs all of the holds, because it has to manufacture bodies to move through the other four holds. So yeah, thank you for that. It's a Sandra Hartman view.
And there's great work by Jennifer Morgan
Yes.
on reproductive racial capitalism. So I was really very much thinking about this.
Jennifer Morgan, yes, you're right. Thank you for that.
Thank you, that was so inspiring.
Thank you, Huru. This is more a response than necessarily a question. First of all, somatically for me, after listening and engaging with your performance, really, I'm not really usually a huge fan of poetry, but I enjoy poetry in motion. I like it performed and collectively appreciated in this kind of context. And my somatic response after listening to it's somewhat it's I don't know if it's ironic or very apt that my breathing was disrupted in the way that it would be if I was dealing with something that would upset me, distressed me, and I don't see that as a bad thing. It was, and I think more generally, widely, I'm finding South Africa is becoming. It's being, I don't know if it's the word is recentered, but it's coming back into kind of my preoccupations in a way of late that is really interesting. I see your performance as a kind of continuation of that. So on several levels, whether it's politically in the parallels of Palestine, another set of the colonial state, and the activist space, in terms of my faith and decolonising my faith and looking at the complicity of, for instance, the Dutch Reformed Church. I've recently come across the activism of Dr. Alan Bozak, which was a real eye-opener for me. I think in terms of even just a sense of I was listening to you and I was wondering, there's a kind of grief that I feel on the peripheries in a way, and it's almost frightening to engage with it because that grief comes with anger. And I wonder, I was a child when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and I was at the cusp of adolescence when apartheid officially ended, or fell in '94. And prior to that, as a child, it was like, when I say background noise, I mean it was this continuous thing that was there, and the struggle and everything, and Winnie Mandela and all. So it was something that was very much part of the cultural or socio-cultural, socio-political landscape of an 80s childhood like mine. And it's not that I haven't engaged with South Africa in some way, in other ways. I've never been, but it's not like I haven't had interest, but I've noticed that recently it's becoming like a motif. And even this morning, by coincidence, I was listening to a report about children going missing and the pandemic really of trafficking of children, and how this to me is again another legacy, another aftermath of the violence of apartheid. And there's a part of me that wonders, okay, I feel this as a human being, I feel an affinity as an African, but I'm not South African. I do wonder, I almost feel like, do I have a right to this grief? I'm just verbally processing. Do I have a right to this grief? It doesn't mean that I can't be guilty of cultural appropriation just because I'm an Afro-descendant. But I wanted to share that because I as I said, there's a kind of there's like, as I said, a motif of South African preoccupation that is recently really coming into focus for me in a way that I'm trying to interact with. And lastly, when you were talking about crying, I thought that we spoke about Blanche Nguma, the anti-apartheid activist and Communist Party member earlier, and she talks in her memoir about being so hardened by the apartheid struggle that she struggled to cry, even when it would be appropriate. When her husband died, whom she loved deeply, she didn't cry. When she was released in solitary confinement, she expected to burst into tears on seeing her children. She didn't cry. Now, it's not that she never cries during the autobiography, and so when she died, you're thinking, oh, she hadn't completely lost the capacity. But I thought it was interesting that it's almost, she said, it was like a way of, it was this coping mechanism in a way that you couldn't be that in touch with your emotions, and it was seen as a liability if you were to be arrested and tortured and might give away too much, so you couldn't allow yourself to feel too much, and then when you needed to feel that was, it's almost like it was taken from you as well, that process. So I thought of that earlier when you were discussing the link between crying or the admonition not to cry and breathing, and so I just wanted to share that, as I said, and there were some other things I wanted to say, but I can't remember.
Do you want to respond to that?
It's not yeah, she said it's not a question, she was just sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much for this fabulous reading. I enjoyed it very much. My question is not an academic question. I was hoping that you could say more about your creative process, and specifically what role does the body play in your creative process? Like the role that the body plays in the product is very clear and very pervasive, but I wanted to know more about, like, when you compose a poem, like, what does your body do? And somehow, like, I was very struck by what you said about the necessity to write poetry that is, like, contrapuntal and oppositional to this idea of a Eurocentric genius, you know, like poetry that's really cerebral and goes through the brain, and especially what you said about locating oppression in the body resonated very much, and I hope that you would say something more about that.
That's a lovely question. Thank you. Let's take one more.
Thank you. Thanks for me as well. I was just really struck by what both of you said about this term or concept of unburying, and especially also with the left-hand side poem on the page on the slide from page 53. I was, and this hasn't really left to me, so that's also this idea to me of, you know, like almost grave robbing in a way, like grave robbing of someone, unburying the grave, not in a way of
grave
robbing, yeah. Not in a way of the, you know, the sacraments of unburying is very ritual and ritualized and honoring way of unburying versus what you said of it's not yet buried, it's not yet honored in a way of having a, you know, proper grave, and to me then the unburied grave also, I don't know, like intentional grave, I don't know if grave robbing is a good way of putting it, but of unearthing graves, and or even like incidental, like the unmarked grave is unearthed, and then, you know, in the rest of the poem, the herbs and the clay pots and so on, that was, you know, an honoring in the actual burial of the body being cast aside, right? Like the abandoned, I don't know, ritual, not artifacts. I'm kind of losing my sentence in a way, but this sort of the presence of also like an uncaring other, or often dishonoring in a way. Yeah, so this kind of third or fourth or fifth dimension to this term was really like sticking with me.
Thank you for both your questions. They're really great. Absolutely, the body is so central to the writing process. My own wish, I prostrate myself and really attune to what my body wants to bring up, especially as it pertains to things that are way out of my reach with my intellectual mind. So the body is wise, the body keeps score, famously, and the body has its own wisdoms, and I trust those wisdoms because they are older than my physical body. They have constellated in the blood. They have constellated in, we have all of this scholarship about epigenetic memory. So I want to listen into that, and the way to listen into it for me is to do somatic work in the mountains and at the altar. And that's how it works. I hope that's clear.
Yeah.
Thank you. And unburied, you're absolutely, I love that. I love that. Grave robbing and so forth. I do want to say that there's a wonderful book called Ritual Geology. And it traces pre-colonial mining. And without really meandering too much, there is no form of digging that happens in indigenous society without ritual, because the subterranean world is a world of gods.
I would like to at least say thank you, at the very, very least, for your sustained attention to this session. Thank you so much for your questions in the nick of time, and thanks also for the extension. Let me maybe proceed and thank you, Uhuru, for sharing what is very incisive cultural critique as well as a deeply personal matter. So please help me in thanking you.
And please help me to thank Hanneke for being such a wonderful